This podcast contains themes of suicide and may upset some listeners. If you're struggling with your mental health and need to talk now, call Lifeline anytime. They're available 24 hours, 7 days a week.
You know, I'd have this great big grin on me and I was dying on the inside.
This paralysis of just not being able to do things that gave me pleasure.
I hated the world, hated the farm, ultimately wanted to sell it.
Everything that was going wrong in my life was somebody else's fault.
A lot of men and women will say, I just don't feel right.
Aussies love the bush, but sometimes the bloody bush doesn't love us back. I'm John Harper, just a simple joker talking about why mental health is everybody's business and what to do if you think a mate is struggling.
This podcast is a Room 3 production and brought to you by our mates at Gotcha for Life and the Murrumbidgee Primary Health Network. In this podcast, you'll be hearing the lived experiences of everyday folk in rural and remote Australia. The language can be strong at times and references of suicide may upset some people. So consider who's around when listening. The advice in this podcast is of a general nature and is not an excuse for you not seeing your own GP or medical professional. Mate Helping Mate has plenty of links on our website of trusted service providers across the country. Head to matehelpingmate.org.au.
Mick was panic stations. He was absolutely panicking because he'd had a heart attack and he'd lost mates younger than him. He said, why am I here? And they're gone. I should have gone. He was looking for me to be the one to care for him. I personally felt that for me to be a happy person, I wasn't content at being the wife and mother anymore. I wanted more.
You have to look after yourself to look after other people. There's that saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. And if you're the person who is trying to make the other person drink the water or make the horse drink, it's very frustrating, it's very energy consuming, it comes at a cost. And you do have to be aware of looking after yourself.
G'day, welcome to the Mate Helping Mate podcast. I'm John Harper and today we're talking about pathways to help. I've got Fiona with me. Fi's a very interesting person in her work, but also in being a mother or a wife, a woman farmer involved in the sheep industry. And Fi, I also actually wanted to talk to you because I want to know why the hell Mick ever put up with you. And I only say that because Mick and I used to share together.
Mick, my husband.
Mick, your husband. So what did Mick have to say when he knew I'd called you up out of the blue?
I said, John just rang me up. He said he needed someone who had some expertise in mental health. And Mick said, you? What would you know about mental health? So, yeah, I'm happy to come here and talk, even though Mick doesn't think that I've got any credibility, but we'll work out how that goes.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think most people, and blokes in particular, are like that. They don't understand the influence of our mental health, our mental well-being on our everyday lives. And, you know, they just think you have to be a expert, qualified expert. You've got to be a bloody psychologist or a psychiatrist to understand mental health. Yet most of us have simple, practical strategies in trying to enjoy our lives. And that's what we're trying to talk about and address today. And that's why I've asked you, Fi.
Yeah, look, my relationship with my husband, you know, we've had some struggles over the last couple of years with health issues and change in life, children leaving home and those sorts of things. So, yeah, things have changed for us and changed for him and changed for me. So I think I've had a real time of reflection and learning lately. So hopefully I can share some of that story.
I think a shearing shed is a really good example of a community, I suppose. You and I both worked in shearing sheds. And how good is it when everybody's together?
It's on song.
There's fun and games and you get the bloody work done, and it doesn't matter if you're shearing damn wethers or not. You know, it seems to be a pleasure to do.
Well, there's pleasure in hard work.
Yeah. But if somebody is struggling, if somebody isolates themselves, you know, and doesn't mix or get involved with some of the jokes, the practical jokes, then how quick does the whole mood, the morale of the shed go down?
Yeah, look, even yourself, I've been in work situations where things haven't been going well for me and you just don't want to be there, but you can't escape it. You've got a job to do and you have to stick it out.
I keep thinking about things like simple little things. You know me, and normally when I used to go in the shed, I used to shake most people's hands, act kind of formal, but I wasn't, and say, "Good day, mate, how you going?" And Big Jack, you remember Jack?
Yep.
Big Jack, I'd give him a hug and he hated it, He thought I was coming out of the closet and got all embarrassed and stuff like that. But I used to do it because it used to pee him off, and the other boys would all laugh and the mood of the shed would always be happier. But what I found interesting was that years after Jack lost, I don't know who he lost. It was a funeral, but anyway, he was a bit devastated. And I remember I went along and Jack gave me a big hug. And all his shearers' mates from Queensland gave him heaps. What's going on? What's going on? You big girl?
Yeah.
And stuff like that. And Jack said, "You don't know what this is about." And what pleased me most was that it was a show of emotion. It showed that he cared about that bloke. The bloke that we'd lost, he cared about him. And I just thought that was magnificent.
Yep, that's right. In the sheds, it could be just as simple as someone offering to get you a refill of your cup of tea. It can be as simple as that, and to include you. It's really small things and they don't cost anything and they don't hurt you to do them. And you've just got to have your eyes open. You've got to have your eyes open for those that are on the fringes sometimes. It is the responsibility of those that are going okay to look out for the ones that aren't going okay.
I can remember when I was down was when I started flogging sheep and doing silly things. I was angry. Little things would piss me off. And I realised not at the time, but afterwards, when I got my shit together, my act back together again, I realised that's not the type of shearer I was, and thank God, I'm right.
Yeah, look, there's symptoms, aren't there? There's symptoms of things not being okay. And the one thing that I think is going to work more than anything is peer support. If someone's having a problem, then the shearer next to him that's respected by the other shearer stepping in and saying, "Hey, our team does this. I'm here to support you, work in this way." That's where it's got to come from. I think that's it's got to come from each other. It's got to come from within the industry itself. So that's something I think would work,
So that's kind of saying that, when it gets tough, we expect the mates of whoever's struggling to step up, to reach out, I suppose, to give help. But then we also expect, to a certain extent, the poor bastard struggling to reach out and understand that if he reaches out and asks for help from mates who he trusted, then it's a win-win situation. It's not one-sided, is it? It's not just about... So in your life, Mick's had his struggles. It's not all about Fee doing everything to make Mick's life happy. He's got to put some input himself.
Absolutely. With what's happened with me at home, when we were, in our 40s, we had kids at home. Mick lost a couple of close mates through, heart attacks, just died, dropped dead, which really impacted on Mick. But the busyness of having kids at home, and I was at home as the wife and mother and housekeeper and looking after Mick, everything ticked on as normal. It was okay because we were distracted by the business of young family. He got through it. Yeah, he was sad. He'd lost his mates. There was people gone from his life that he didn't have to ring up and talk on the phone, have a beer with anymore. But the busyness of life distracted from that. But distraction doesn't actually fix. So got to be careful, I think, that when we're helping people, we're not just distracting them too. So everything was okay. And then, our kids left home. They grew up and we were in our 50s. And I personally felt that for me to be a happy person, I wasn't content at being the wife and mother anymore. I wanted more. And that put a bit of fear into Mick's life because the structures that he'd known, he lost his dad as well. As you do, you lose your parents. They get old and they go. So he didn't have that consistency anymore. And then he had this wife that was looking and moving and doing more away from home. So he was losing that. He thought he was losing all these things. Then Mick had a heart attack. And when Mick had his heart attack, after he felt like he'd lost his home structures and his distractions of kids and busy life were gone, it really hit him hard. It really did, you know.
Yeah, for Mick, it was nearly like the big fella telling him, this is the end.
Yeah.
You're buggered.
Yeah, even though Mick's always like, oh, you know, everyone, die young, ha, ha, ha. And I don't think he fears death. I don't think that's it. I don't think that was it at all. But it frightened the shit out of him. It really did. But to make matters worse, so we're on the path to getting him better, that was all going okay. But he really looked at me. He really looked at me to help him. And I had this big jolt that it wasn't up to me to help Mick anymore, that if Mick was going to get through having a heart attack, because he was now taking medication and in diabetes and checking his blood and all this sort of stuff, and he was looking for me to be the one to care for him. But I couldn't take it on. I actually couldn't, because I had me to take care of as well. I couldn't do it. So Mick was panic stations. He was absolutely panicking because he'd had a heart attack. Didn't look like his wife was going to look after him.
Well, and he lost mates younger than
him.
Yeah.
Within the next year, he lost his very close cousin, which was Jack, the shearer you were talking about.
Bloody Jack.
He lost Jack. Jack was his cousin. They grew up, We've got photos of them in a cot together as babies. So this is this guy he shore with, he partied with, he grew up with. His lifelong friend and the toughest bloke that he knew had died. And then my cousin's husband died at 50 within, a couple of months later. So he was Mick, now the survivor. And actually being the survivor had its own problems as well. He said, why am I here?
And they're gone. Far out. I've been there too, don't worry.
And he was nearly to the point where he was saying, I should have gone because these other people were wonderful, beautiful people that I loved, and here I am still alive. That was really tough. That being a survivor was really tough for me, nearly as tough as nearly not being a survivor. And I went to the doctor with Mick because, he's on all this medication now. He's got trays and trays of pills, and it's hard for him to, he feels like it's beyond his ability to cope with the medication he's on. So I was at the doctor with him, and Mick was getting really aggressive with the doctor. I could see the doctor looking at me and
which is not Mick.
Yeah.
Not the Mick we know.
And the doctor's darting glances at me and like, what's the go with this bloke? Is he mad? And I'm like nodding my head. Yep, he is. He's doing it tough. I'm trying to wink and nod at the doctor and saying, Mick's not coping with the tablets he's on now. I'm trying to sow the seed in the doctor's mind that there's actually more to this than Mick just having a heart attack and dealing with taking, 7 tablets a day. It's actually more going on here. So the doctor started to talk to Mick about it, and Mick said, there's nothing wrong with me.
So when you say it, you're talking about what, depression, mental illness? Yeah.
The doctor said, do you think you might be depressed, Mick? And Mick said, bloody depressed? I've got to take all these bloody tablets for the rest of my bloody life just to stay alive. Of course I'm bloody depressed. But if I didn't have to take the tablets, this is Mick shortcutting it all. If I didn't have to take the tablets, I'd be okay. Mick was looking for the easy outs. He really was. He was looking for the if everyone just leaves me alone, I'll be okay, While all this was happening, I wasn't going real well either. For me, it's really easy to admit when I'm not going okay. I'm the most open, yappy person you'll come across, so it was really easy for me to say to John, hey, John, I'm not going really. We had a road trip together, didn't we, John? And
Yep.
And John's like, yeah, I think I've got a friend you can go see, actually. I think it might be a good idea, which I did. And I followed that up for a couple of years, actually.
Who was a qualified person.
And part of that was about also getting me to put my thoughts in line. So I actually understood what was happening between Mick and I, because there is a relationship there. So I really, really looked at what was happening in our relationship and why it was heading the way it was. And that helped me to realise that the best way to help Mick was to get him to help himself, actually, which was a bit of tough love in that he has to learn how to take his own tablets. And we got him an exercise bike and we sat it on the veranda, and he looked at it, I reckon, for 6 months. He'd walk past and look at it. Now he sits on it twice a day. And he won't tighten the tension up, he just freewheels, but he sits there and he spins on his bike. And
you're going to have to take a bloody shot of that, because I don't believe that of the Mick I know, but that's great.
So he sits on his exercise bike while he's running his sheepdogs. The sheepdogs are all running around the back lawn. He yells at the dogs and he sits on his bike and he pedals away and he says, I feel good after I've done that. And he doesn't have to go anywhere. No one's got to see him. He's just sitting on his back veranda with his dogs. So it was just about getting Mick to help himself.
But some of that, in getting him to help himself, you did access and use different pathways to manipulate him, didn't you?
I manipulated
What about
him.
Bart? So he lost some young mates, but basically some of his mates stepped up, didn't they?
Well, that's the other thing. All I could do was say to the people around him that were close to him, that cared about him, that I knew were people that would understand. I'd say, hey, come and sit down with Mick, but just have a listen to him and see what you think. And they're like, right. And they listened and they understood and they could see that Mick wasn't the person that he was before the heart attack. And before losing Jack, they could see that Mick was a different person. They could see it.
So until you actually asked them to come and sit with Mick, a lot of these people, I think subconsciously, wouldn't they, be aware that Mick was struggling, but they weren't going to put anything in, have an input. So when you asked them and they actually sat and physically came and saw him face to face, that kind of helped them step up a bit to help Mick.
Yeah, that's right. Like Mick would put on the, come and have a beer, mate, come and have a beer, when people turned up and sit on the veranda, and it could easily just turn into a beer drinking session, slap each other on the back and go away. But because I'd already mentioned something, it was more measured. Mick thought he was having a couple of beers with a mate, but
we were wheeling him.
Mick was completely manipulated.
Poor bastard.
Yeah, I know. That's, I wouldn't say things are great with Mick and I wouldn't say they're fantastic, but I think we've both come to the point where we needed to just step back and become more measured. We could just get caught up in either monotony and humdrum and not have any growth or not have any joy or any plans, which I could see happening, or any, future direction. We could have just dissolved into that. We could have done that. We could have separated, and then it might have solved things for me because I could have moved on with what I needed to do, but I didn't want to do that either because I didn't think that was fair to Mick because,
Well, he was your mate.
He was my mate.
Mm.
So now I think we're just sitting at a point now where everything is exposed. It's out. We're talking about it. We talk about Mick's health. We talk about it. Because I think for Mick, his physical health is very connected to his emotional health. So we talk about it all the time.
So does he talk about how he's feeling? Does he tell you in as many words that he's pissed off or anything? Or does he just be crank like his mood change? I mean, I'm a bloke that goes about talking about this, but 2 weeks ago, I thought my throat cancer had come back, and I tell you, I was just shit to live with. I just was ripping Mitch's head off. Boom, boom, boom. And yet I never talked properly about how I was actually feeling. And yet here I am on this podcast preaching it to other buggers.
Yeah, look, he's not going to say it. It's not part of his way of being. I think that would be unreasonable of me to expect him to tell me how he feels. I think the day that I felt a real shock in my relationship with Mick was the day we went to the accountant and Mick made some decisions, financial decisions, in front of the accountant. It was the first I'd heard about it. I felt out of control, that someone else's ideas and someone else's motivations were actually influencing my life without me being considered. And it was sad. Yeah.
But I suppose that highlights the point, isn't it? Is when you're spiralling down, when you're struggling, you isolate. And when you isolate, you're you have the perception that nobody cares about you, so then why bother about them? So then you make decisions only about yourself, whether they're good, bad or in between. So, I'm reading between the lines here. I suppose that meeting at the accountant's with Mick was that he was struggling at that time. So he was isolating. You probably weren't connecting as well as you should do. So then he thought, well, bugger it. She doesn't give a shit. I'm just going to make these decisions, bugger her.
Yeah. Yep. I'd say so. Yeah, absolutely. I think that For me, I had to become independent to be able to live with Mick as a partnership. It was actually about me getting independence from him. And ironically, it was about me showing Mick how to be independent from me, which actually helped that as well. So once we became independent, I didn't feel like I was being smothered and, being needed. And so I could relax. And then when he learnt skills and how to look after himself, he felt liberated and more comfortable. So it was quite an interesting way to actually heal, was to become separate.
Sometimes I think the experts believe that we don't know we're struggling. But I'm pretty sure I sat out there on that stinking veranda, just out through that window, for bloody 6 or 8 months, 8-10 hours a day. And I knew I was struggling. But could I get off my ass to help myself? No way knowing. I think people know and they know what they should do. It's actually doing it that becomes so difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I recognise in myself, my kids are gone and Mick's health was going, and I'd put changes in place to move on with my career. And so I felt like I'd ruined our, I ruined it, yeah. So I wasn't going real well, and I recognised I wasn't going real well because I couldn't plant flowers. I could not. I looked at empty flower pots, but there was no way I could have dug a hole in that soil and put a flower in it. I was paralysed, just could not do that. And, I went and saw professional help about it, and these were the symptoms that I was talking about, this paralysis of just not being able to do things that gave me pleasure. Just couldn't do it.
The point of this podcast is about getting ordinary people off their ass to help themselves or to help others.
It just felt right for me to seek out professional help. And it was quite painless, actually, because, again, it was just like having a conversation with someone, except this time that person drew out those key points because that's what they're trained to do, and gave me things to go home with that were things I could just reflect on.
Do you believe they gave you the precise answers or just strategies?
Just strategies, because we're all individual, and then you go home and things would actually change perspective then when you go home with that reflection of what you just talked about. Things would actually change, and things that seemed insurmountable or difficult actually seemed different. Maybe not the problem after all, but it was something else that I actually could control. One day I bought a punnet of flowers and planted them, and I nearly felt guilty about being happy. I was like, oh God, look at me being happy, but I did it. And I was like, damn, I know what to do now. I'm on the right track. But I always laughed to myself about the Homer Simpson, the Simpsons episode where Marge goes to get professional help. She goes to a counsellor, and Homer says, oh, all they do is they turn children against their fathers and wives against their husband. And I think that's what Mick thought. When I went to see a professional, he had fear. Because I didn't tell him for a while, but then I told him because I was going away to appointments. And I think he had fear that what's she going to learn and how's this going to impact on me?
So you used a wide number of strategies and people.
And it took a long time.
To help.
I think that was the other thing too. It's a work in progress, isn't it? 2 steps forward, 1 step back sometimes too. Didn't mean failure. I didn't look at any time and think, okay, because I'm feeling sad again, I've failed, and what I've just done with the counsellor.
Didn't you feel that every time you took 1 step back, that you're scared shitless that you're going to go back further?
Back further.
Yeah, no, I do. But I suppose the other thing I find interesting is that you were prepared, and you did use professional people, the GPs, social counsellor, yet Mick's a different type of person. He hasn't accessed or used those sorts of people. You're both in better places, but slightly different strategies?
For sure. For Mick, it's actually time out for Mick looking after his health on that exercise bike, which to him is painless, surrounded by his sheepdogs. It feels good for him to do that. And, having me teed up a few mates to just guide the conversations in different directions with him, he accepts that really well. And so, yeah, talking with friends worked with Mick, and exercise worked with Mick. I think those things were really important for him, and they're pretty simple things to access, aren't they?
Well, for those who are struggling out there, whether it's their mates or themselves. Is there any simple advice?
Yeah, look, I look at my own children as they move into their relationships and themselves as they make decisions, life decisions and career decisions. I think it's not about being happy. I think it's about action. You have the control over your own actions and decisions. I want them to be confident to make decisions. And I think that's when it comes to, simple folk helping themselves, myself as a wife, it was just about taking action. So it's those first steps, isn't it? Take the first steps.
So I've got an ancient great-great-uncle Confucius, and he said it's a wise man who acknowledges a problem early so that he can address it. And
yes.
To address it positively, you've got to make decisions.
Yes.
All right. Well, in winding up, I've really got to thank you, Fee, for stepping up to the mark. And I also think that you've imparted a lot of wisdom and probably direction, simple directions for people to move forward. So thank you very much, Fee.
No, thank you, John. Look, I don't think my story is remarkable in any way at all, and I think it's probably something that's very common with a lot of people. So I'm happy to be here, John.
This podcast has been made possible by our mates at the Gotcha for Life Foundation. Gotcha for Life was established to reverse the tide of declining mental health and to reduce suicide rates by taking action and having a positive outcome on mental health. Gotcha for Life enables communities to build mental fitness, social connection, emotional muscle and resilience. Head to gotchaforlife.org to catch events, get involved or donate. This podcast has also been brought to you by the Murrumbidgee Primary Health Network, also known as the MPHN for short. The MPHN's Empowering Our Communities grant is the government's way of walking the talk, demonstrating their commitment to supporting families and communities living with the impacts of drought, with a focus on mental health and wellbeing.
G'day, mates. Back again. I'd like to introduce Dr. Lisa Paterson-Kane. She's not sitting opposite me. In fact, she's at the back of Whoop Whoop, up in the sticks near Walker, and I'm down at Stock and Bingle in the Riverina, out on the plains. Dr. Lisa is a psychologist, and as such, many of us believe they're a rare species. They're different. They're different to us. Well, she ain't. She's a farmer's daughter. She's now a farmer's wife. She's got kids, but she's a practicing psychologist. She's smarter, more switched on than an ordinary fella like me. She's realised that times are changing. So she was smart enough to use other methods, using modern technology, Etherapy, smartphones, having apps on the phone, and I'm hoping that today with our discussion, you will hear of strategies, you will hear of other pathways, of access points that you may not have realised. And I'm telling you now, I'm not sure whether I really want to hear them, whether I'm scared of them, whether they're going to cost me money. But all I know is you'll be better off for knowing them, because if we stay where we are and if we do nothing, nothing will change. So great, we're using modern technology. I can't see you, Dr. Lisa, but it's great to have you on the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me, John.
Oh, it's no issue at all. I know you've listened to Fiona and Mick's story. They're great mates of mine that have struggled. And to a certain extent, I found it quite interesting. Generally, with these sorts of stories, we hear about the person struggling. They hit a crisis, whatever. In this case, Fiona's story is a bit about how she got dragged down, thinking that she was the one that had to provide the answers for Mick and his well-being. And that's not the case. Does that often happen in your world, in the people you get to meet and listen to?
Yeah, definitely. Often people will get in touch with me, or a very frequent question that I will get is people will say to me, how can I help somebody else that I'm worried about? Or what are the things that I can do to help somebody else? And so you often do see people really kind of being the care facilitators for other people. And with that, it comes at a cost at at times for people, because there's that saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. And if you're the person who is there that is trying to make the other person drink the water or make the horse drink, it's very frustrating. It's very energy consuming. It, as I said before, it comes at a cost. And you do have to be aware of looking after yourself. You have to look after yourself to look after other people.
Exactly. And as I said, I think in Fiona's story, you could hear it even in her voice, the challenge there was to her, how draining it was, and trying to live up to Mick's expectations of her when their whole world was changing, not just in regards to his health, but in regards to their relationship. It was changing from having young kids at home to they've moved out. Mick's life changed. He was struggling a little bit with the loss of mates and his cousin at a young age. Then he has a physical health problem that actually, put him over one side of that knife edge.
Yeah. And something that I often say to people is our mental health isn't an entitlement. We're not entitled to be mentally healthy. We have to do things to look after ourselves. Now, for each person, what that may be is a little bit different, and at different stages of our lives, we may need to do more or less to maintain and have a positive mental health. But if we do nothing, we cannot expect that it's just going to be there for us. So understanding that, whether you use buzzwords like resilience or self-care or whatever it might be you want to call it, at the end of the day, it's pretty much common sense that if you don't look after yourself, if you don't maintain your machinery, you can't expect it to run well. If you don't maintain yourself, you can't expect yourself to run well, especially through adversity.
I often say to people, I'm a simple man. It doesn't mean I'm stupid. It means I look at things in simple ways. But I think I've just learned something from you, and that is, we're not entitled to mental well-being. We have to work at it. And I don't think I've ever twigged to that. As a farmer, I see that. I mean, our tractors don't just keep running forever and ever without us servicing them and doing stuff to them. Yet we expect ourselves just to keep bloody well going.
And people will often be quite surprised when they don't. And it's a shock, and it's what's wrong with me? And it's not that there's anything wrong with you. You just haven't been maintained the way that you need to be. So it's just about taking a step back and going, well, what am I doing to look after myself? And as I said, it's through those periods of adversity. So whether it be loss and grief might be a trigger, it could be a physical health response. It can be kids leaving home, having to go to boarding school. It can be drought. It can be any of those things that we pretty much say it's the extra stuff that goes into your bucket. And if your bucket is at a very already well-maintained level, then you can tolerate those other things that go in. You've got the space there because you've been maintaining it. But if it's not at a healthy level and it hasn't been maintained, because it's inevitable that these things will happen in life. Bad things happen to good people. It's not fair, but it happens. So if you have been able to maintain yourself to have and again, using one of those buzzwords, a level of resilience, because resilience basically means that you can bounce. So when something bad happens, instead of hitting the ground like a flat football, you're able to kind of bounce back up. And if you've been able to do things, and if you have things in your life, so support networks, physical activity, personal goals, a sense of purpose, if you have those things in your life, you're much more inclined to bounce back up. But those things don't just happen. You have to take a step back and go, okay, what are those things that I have in my life? What do I do to create them?
This story of Fiona highlights that. We have talked about how social connectiveness is a foundation of resilience. But what we haven't realised, or I haven't realised, others may well do, but as I said, I've learnt today, there is a emphasis on us working towards that. And I mean, that's the challenge of poor mental well-being, is we don't have the energy. In Mick's instance, he finds himself in a place where he is unwell, physically and mentally, and initially he expected Fiona to fix it. And really, it's not entirely up to her, okay? She wants to help out, but there's got to be some input. There's got to be some oomph from you. Otherwise, we're always going to be behind the 8 ball. You're using various means, Etherapy, whatever. Are there barriers to them? Do people access them readily? Do you have to talk them into it? How do they get involved?
So basically, Etherapy or telepsychology or telepsychiatry is just about using technology to bridge the distance barrier that's there. So that's, for such a long time, people have always said that isolation, like geographical isolation, is one of the most significant barriers to access for people in rural remote areas to psychological and psychiatric care. So for some people, they're a little bit adverse to it at the start. But the majority of people that I work with love the fact that they don't have to get in a car and travel 6 hours to talk to somebody, because it's about making it easier for them to get the help that they so often really desire.
Yeah, it's reality. By using these electronic means and social media, we have ways of people can access the help. It's a slightly different term, isn't it?
There's 2 different forms of your e-therapy. So there's therapist-assisted stuff, and that's what I was talking about before, where you've got your clinician, your clinical psychologist, such as myself, engage with them. You have sessions via Skype, can have regular contact in between sessions. But then there's also programs that people can access that have been written by clinical psychologists and psychiatrists that are self-guided, that people can work through as well. So particularly when people don't feel quite ready to sit down and talk with somebody, there are a lot of programs that are out there that they can access, which are free of charge. So accessing services isn't what it used to be. It's not a matter of having to walk through the doors. Accessing services is about finding the information, connecting with the people, and so often you don't even need to leave your home.
Geez, I'm excited in anticipation of Mick listening to some of this, because Mick's a bloke like me, is that he's somewhat, not scared's not the word, but doesn't want to be seen to be presenting for help. The individual retains a degree of control over their life. I mean, I think that's one of the things that people that have to travel avoid.
A lot of the video sessions that I do with people are of an evening or on a Saturday morning or something like that, at a time that works. So if it doesn't mean that you have to stop. Like if you're in the middle of shearing or if you're in the middle of harvest or whatever it might be, it's really exciting that people have this access. No longer being in a rural area, we're not behind the 8 ball anymore. It's actually the best thing about it is that people in urban areas actually can't get Medicare on telepsychiatry and telepsychology. Only rural people can. And the government has said, we want to give you the same access that people in the city have. So this is how we see that you do it. And I think it's great. Finally, we get something that they don't.
Oh, Lisa, wash your mouth out. Look,
Yep.
Very simply, in summary, what would be the key points you'd like to make or strategies that you'd like to push? That it's not just necessarily presenting, it's a smorgasbord out there?
Yeah, and I think that there's more than one way to skin a cat. So
I love that saying.
if there's a problem, don't feel as though if you don't see yourself fitting into that traditional model of seeking assistance, that's the only thing that's out there for you. There are so many options out there, but nothing changes if nothing changes. So you have to be engaged in the process to make something a little bit different, whether that be that you engage in more exercise or whether that be that you engage in a self-directed psychological program, whether you get a referral from your GP, whatever it is, but something has to change in order for things to get better. But don't feel as though there's only one option out there, because that's not the case. There's a plethora.
Yep. Thank you, Lisa, Dr. Lisa, for engaging with this podcast. As I said, I've learnt something that was obvious in Fiona and Mick's story. Mental well-being is not an entitlement. You have to work at it. Mick's working at it in a manner he can. And I suppose the other point is, and I'm learning this just in this recording, in that you're not sitting opposite me. I can't see you. This is a different realm for me, that there's all different ways of achieving a result. So I'm hoping for you podcast people out there that you appreciate the link with Dr. Lisa Paterson-Kane. Please go on, have a look at the work she does in manners that I don't fully understand. So thank you, Lisa, for being involved.
Thank you for having me.
You know, I think as a wife and mother, sometimes, you know, we have a lot of pressure on us to be the provider. And look, there's always help for us and to help our loved ones. So you can always ring Lifeline on 13 11 14. They're available 24/7. That might be something that you could seek out.
In finishing, a reminder that this podcast featured general information only, and we recommend that you get independent advice from a qualified professional like your GP. There's plenty of links on the Mate Helping Mate website as well, so you can contact service providers across the country. Head to matehelpingmate.org.au. This podcast was a Room 3 production and brought to you by our mates at Gotcha for Life and the Murrumbidgee Primary Health Network. We'd also like to thank Riverina Bluebell and David Post at ROC, or Rural Outreach Counselling, for their support. You can find out more about these organisations and the great work that they do on our Mate Helping Mate website. Other episodes of this podcast can be found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts and Stitcher Radio by searching for Mate Helping Mate and hitting subscribe. If you've liked what you've heard, make sure you leave a rating to make it easier for others to find us. You can also head to the Mate Helping Mate website and listen there. And better yet, you can share those links with your friends and family to start a conversation about mental health in the bush. This podcast was produced by Erin Johnson, Kayla Robertson and AJ Clifford for Room 3, a production company that works with not-for-profits and social enterprise across Australia. We'd also like to thank today Fiona for driving out to the farm and telling her story, and also Dr. Lisa Paterson-Kane for her time and advice over the phone. And finally, we've got to thank the man himself, John Harper, for all the years he's travelled this country, tirelessly working to improve mental health in rural and remote Australia. And there's also Mitch for all of her support for John throughout the years and her hospitality to our crew and all the guests who have come out to the farm during this time. Recorded and edited by AJ Clifford. Original music by Southwalk Sounds and stock by Soundstripe. Thank you for listening, hoping you can move forward, and we hope this makes a difference.